Run this share screen. Okay, so you guys can see my screen now, and I'm just going to show you what my current screens are, so you know where we are. You should see in day 2 we have this, week 9, day 2, we have this small doc here. This doc is not very thorough because today is going to be like a demo-based class in which we're just going to take what we finished yesterday with part 4 of Video Store or whatever you have, and we're just going to start introducing more ideas. This is our last day of like pure React. We're going to talk about React testing tomorrow, I believe, and then as the week goes on, we're going to talk about like integrating this with our existing backend, meaning serving up the React app from our backend and actually, having this, regular back and forth communication between them. But for today, we're just going to round out what we know about the client side, how to do things in React. And so there's 3 topics that I thought were essential. I have a few more. There's definitely more we can get into here. And your guys' own opinions can lead some of this because you will have, I'm just kind of curious to find out what it is in the React world we haven't touched that maybe you've heard about and thought, oh, what is this? Is this important? But there's basically 3 topics I really want to cover. One is this thing called PropTypes. PropTypes is a library that you can see right here. It used to be built into React. It is not anymore, but the purpose of it is to make it so that even though JavaScript is dynamically typed, you're going to get a little more static typing like experience for your props. So let's say you have some component and it takes, it's expected to take a single prop called like name. You can say, well, that must be a string and it must be present. And so if it's not present, or if it is present, but you pass like a number or something, that won't work. It won't compile. And you want to get those warnings up front. It's very useful. It's much weaker than TypeScript, for example. TypeScript would be the heavy duty solution, but it's a really easy in to getting some static typing without having to learn something much larger like TypeScript. The second thing we're going to talk about is more hooks. So if you look on the website, lots and lots of hooks here. We've covered use effect and use state, which I believe, in my opinion, are the most essential ones. There's a third one that is as essential. It's called use context. It looks like Dan talked about this a little today, but the point of use context is basically to address this thing called the prop drilling problem, which just means if you have, a component which has a component, which has a component, which has a component, and your state lives at the top level, you're going to have to pass it down in the form of props all the way down. And use context is a means of defining a context in the form of a provider component and some data, and then anything below it in the hierarchy has direct access. And of course, we're going to go into this more when we touch each thing. In terms of other hooks, I'm open to what you guys want to talk about. I think it's worth talking about use callback and use memo, which are very similar. They're just ways of getting a little more fine-grained control over re-rendering, which sometimes you want to do in response to a function or a value changing. So we'll talk about that a little. And then there's use ref. Use ref is also important in my opinion because it represents a kind of, it's not so obvious up front, but when you get down a little, you'll see that it's very useful for manipulating the DOM itself. So React normally doesn't want you to have that direct access, but you can have it with use ref. So let's say you have some input element like so. The ref would allow you to grab that input element exactly and say something like dot focus, something you might not have the ability to touch directly without it. And then finally, the third thing I wanted to talk today was using some kind of component library to essentially get professional level components without having to write them yourself. So I think I'm going to use MUI. MUI is the one I'm most used to. It's based on it's based on Google's Material UI, which is like a design library. It's not necessarily anything to do with React, but they implemented it in React. And you can see it looks like this, where, so let's say we have this element or this component here. This component actually breaks down into, a much more specific thing where we say like, oh, we have a card and inside that card is a box and we're able to give it, it has this API, as I call it, where given prompts, we're actually able to say like what we want it to look like. And just without having to go into a ton of depth, we're able to get something that looks and functions sort of like, a fair amount of work was put into it. And that is the main selling point. Like here, you just see there's lots of different things. What I tend to like is as like, for instance, like you might wonder like, why is there even a button? But it's because you don't want to be reinventing the button. And so there's certain ideas you'll see in almost every design system, like it's going to look one way primary, it's going to look one way disabled, it's going to look one way when it's a link, I guess. And just they're giving you different options without you having to really think about it. And it just makes it nice, because otherwise you'd be trying to make your own sort of button wrapper and you'd be updating it all the time, and you shouldn't be reinventing the wheel. A button is pretty standard. If you ever want to make your own button, you can, but this will give you like, a nice little thing there. And yeah, so we're going to talk about that today as well. What else is here? You see it's like very large. There really is a lot it gives you theoretically. Okay, and that's all we're definitely talking about today. We'll see how much time we have, but we're probably going to try and give as much time as we can to all of you having, questions or saying like, can we talk about this or that? So, and Dan is mentioning use navigate. Use navigate is a very useful hook. It's part of React Router. So it's not part of React's core, library of hooks. But we can certainly talk about that, because yeah, that is, if one plans to use React Router, it's a pretty useful hook. And that's probably a good stretch, which is to talk about making your own hooks, which is relatively advanced and you almost never will do it, but it will give you insight into how these other libraries make their own hooks. Cool. So let's get started. Over here in demos and notes, I just have Video Store Part 4 open, and I feel like that's a good place to start messing with this stuff. And note that we haven't actually, none of what I mentioned has been implemented here yet. So we might run into some issues, and that will, give you a sense of what this might be actually like. And Francisco, I'm going to be driving. Francisco is going to be navigating. Always forget that word. So we're just going to do this collectively, and this should be as interactive as you guys want it to be. And then, yeah, we'll take questions along the way and feedback. Cool. So I would say let's do it in the order we see them. Let's start with prop types. Does that sound good?
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. So I'm going to go here, and it might even make sense for me to pull this over to that page so that I could see it. PropTypes is a library that used to be built into React, is not anymore. So now we are going to grab it separately on NPM. It doesn't mean React doesn't like it or support it anymore. It just means they didn't feel it was necessary for it to be part of the core library anymore. They felt, okay, well, not everyone is going to use this. We'll just split it off into its own thing. And the main reason not everyone will use it is because TypeScript is a much more robust solution, but it's not, they didn't want to like force you. They didn't want to say PropTypes is official, TypeScript is some third-party Microsoft thing. They were going out of their way to say, you really make the choice. We're not going to preference one over the other. Cool. So here we are. We look in package.json. We'll see our current dependencies. I think it's nice to see something like this, npm install -- save, which is going to put it in the dependencies, prop types. And now it's there. We have something called prop types. Cool. So keep scrolling down, and I'm showing this in part to show you like how you might actually read, very basic docs, because prop types doesn't have like a website for its docs. It's literally just its npm page or, its GitHub page. So you might see stuff that is not so relevant to you, like how to include it in a different way. Okay, but here we are. And the first thing is that we're going to import it. It's going to look like that. And I can go into, let's say, app.jsx, and I have my app here. Actually, we probably want to find one that already has props. So I see I have the details page.
No
So
props.
yeah, I guess because I ended up using React Router, I have no props. Is that right? I must have props somewhere. There we go. Inventory item. So homepage uses inventory item. Homepage, has this all film data, which is going to get all that film data and it's going to map it. And each inventory item will have a key, which the inventory, that's just, for the sake of React, because it's a list of things. And then each one will have a single prop called film data, but that's actually enough. So right now, we see that, if I go to this homepage, we're showing a bunch of inventory items, and each thing of film data, I look into it. So I'm not printing anything right now. Oh, and also I stopped running it, so that is going to make a difference. Okay, that's better now. There we go. So we are printing something, and you see here, we're just printing, the 4 things, but each one of those represents a single object of film data that's being passed to the inventory item. And then if I look at the inventory item, I see that, I'm grabbing props there, and I'm peeling a couple things off props. I'm saying, or rather, I'm saying props.film data, and I know that it has an ID, a title, and a poster, and I just kind of know that. So you'll see that if I say like dot here, I think maybe it has no idea there's something in there called poster, because how would it know? It just knows it's being passed something. It doesn't even know it's an object, probably. Like if I hover over film data, it says any. It literally has no idea what this is, except that it's something JavaScript. And JavaScript isn't explicit about types generally. So that isn't, it could be more useful. So to demonstrate the problem, let me, here I'm mapping each inventory item, but let's say after I map these inventory items, I say like, well, actually, right below all those, I'm going to have another inventory item, and it doesn't have to have a key because it's not in a list. And I'm just going to say something like, okay, this, I'm passing something called film data. Well, what is film data? I'm just going to put an object here, and I'm going to say, okay, this thing has a title, and that title is going to be Super Mario Brothers movie. And maybe we're just going to give it, this let's actually find out. Yeah, if we go to Super Mario Brothers movie, IMDb. So we go here, and right here is that ID. So this is going to let me, so yeah, let's say I had something like this, IMDb ID, was that how it was spelled? IMDb capital ID, right? So we might have something like this, right? And I'm just hard coding it. And why am I doing that? I'm going to save. And what we will see is that I see a title, Super Mario Brothers movie. Okay, interesting. So I see a title, Super Mario Brothers movie. I passed it the title, right? I just want to, it's a little hard to see everything right now, but we'll scroll. So I passed it the title, Super Mario Brothers movie. So it had that. And I passed it the ID. So actually, when we click on it, it works. So if I click on, that element, we go here and we can go back to the homepage, but we're not seeing the poster. Why not? Can anyone tell me why we're not seeing the poster right now? And if no one answers within 10 seconds.
Well, there isn't a poster hard coded. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't ask hard questions generally, or at least I'm just trying to get like, so yeah, that's exactly it. We didn't pass it. It doesn't know about this thing, but notably, it doesn't complain that we didn't pass it. So this is where PropTypes comes in. So I'm going to go to my inventory item here. And I see it does take props. And so I see, okay, and here, the first thing I want to do is import PropTypes. So I can do that right here, import prop types from And the library is called prop_types. Cool. And as you see, we're creating this function here, inventory item. And so after we create that function, we're able to say something like inventory item. We grab the inventory item, the component, and then we say dot prop types with a lowercase p there. And oops, see it. So with a lowercase p, I can say prop types. And this is something that React is actually aware of. And then I can pass it prop types. And the way that I do that is by giving it an object. And in this case, what is in my props, just one thing called film data. Okay. And what is film data? Well, at the very simplest, I can just say, well, it's an object, right? So I could say prop types dot object. And now this ideally will yell at me in some fashion if I don't give it at least an object. I'm pretty sure it gets more sophisticated than this. I hope it does. Otherwise, I'm not gonna be able to
It
demonstrate
does.
much. It does.
Later on, I'll let you specify what type of things should be inside of the object.
Okay, so we're gonna discuss that in a second, yeah, because I'm used to a slightly different API with this with TypeScript.
I think it's looking
Right,
for a
so
lower O
what
an
was that?
object. I think it's looking for a lowercase o an object, or at least it is in the documentation.
Yes, you're correct. Yeah, so that is right. And it's right. Okay, so this should continue to work right now, I believe. This should, yeah, continue to work because we are still passing in an object. But the first thing I want to see is, well, what if for this one, instead of passing it, in an object, what if I just passed it the number 1? So I'm going to save, and now we're getting some errors. Cool. So it's actually saying, warning, failed prop type, invalid prop, film data of type number supplied to inventory item, expected object. And that's really useful because we're actually getting data now saying, hey, you said it would have a shape. And that's how I think of data, a shape. You're saying your data has a certain shape, but I'm trying to match, the shape you said or the mold you said it should have against the shape you actually passed me, and it doesn't fit. You told me to expect a square, you passed me a triangle. That doesn't work. And so you get these errors, and these errors are a clue to you that you probably are doing something incorrect. And that's the main purpose of type systems as I see them. They're an early warning sign that you probably did something incorrect because you want to expect things, just like with a function. When you take parameters, you want to expect your data to fit a certain shape, because if you don't, it either will fail when you pass it the wrong stuff, or you'll have to be very careful about guarding it and saying, is this, does this have the shape I expect it to do? And this whole system just, keeps you, the programmer, from having to directly think about whether the type is correct. Okay, so let me go back and actually give it a title and an IMDb ID, and let's do it like that so we can actually see it a little. And
then,
yeah.
Sorry, Ben, to interrupt you right there, but just so everyone knows, I know to some people this might seem like it's an extra step and it might be unnecessary, or it could be just extra time that could be afforded elsewhere. This is actually going to end up saving you a lot of time in the development process, because then every time a component or something that's requiring a specific type of data isn't getting it passed, it's letting you know right away. And you could just identify it while you're developing, instead of trying to spend the time figuring out what's going wrong, why it's not rendering the correct way. Now your program's picking up the slack for you and letting you know what's going on. And my bad, Ben. Yeah.
No, please, by all means, you are the other instructor right now. Yeah, and another thing that is very positive about it is that right now you've mostly worked on your own, maybe with a pair at times on projects, but as a project gets larger, more and more people work on it. And like at any company, some people come, some people go. It's hard to keep track of who actually did what work. And so if you're looking at a component you didn't write, and it just says props, there's no prop type thing, you're going to have to read that whole component to actually understand how it works, what it expects, and it's going to be easy to mess it up. And this is almost like documentation. It's saying, me, the programmer who wrote this is essentially the API that I expect it to follow. And as long as it follows this, shape, we should be good. If not, you'll probably run into some problems. So, Francisco, is there a way that I can say not an object, but a specific object? Like I want something to have, I want it to be an object with, at the very least, a title of type string,
Yes.
a poster type string. Okay.
Yeah. So instead of object, you could use the exact parameter of prop types. And then in parentheses, you could then specify what data type. So if we wanted an object, it would just be an object. As in the curly brackets.
Oh, you're saying I give it like an actual object.
Yeah. And then you open it up and you start specifying the elements that it should have and what type it should be.
Yeah. So now I could say something like it has something called title. And that is going to be of type string. Just making sure I get those casings right. And then it's also going to have a poster of type string. And even that IMDb ID is of type string. And yeah, I know what you guys are going to say. I forgot to write prop types there. Okay, so basically it has these, it wants an exact object that has at least these three things. I wonder if it will complain if it has more than these three things. Hopefully not. Yeah, I had a feeling it would. I'm sure there's a way to do this then. It's saying actually it doesn't like this because it has even more. Like we have those fields, but we said exact and we're giving it an object with a lot more than just those three things. So we're going to look back here and there must be, something like exact, but rather it's the opposite of exact. It's saying at least.
Yeah, you could use shape, I believe.
Shape?
Yes.
Right. That's exactly what I was looking for. And that's how I think of it too. So this is all, somewhere on their documentation. I apologize that, oh, there it is. Okay. So it's all here. So we're saying, yeah, it takes a title, a poster, an IMDb ID, and we'll see now if I reload this, we're not getting any errors. So that's good. It's actually saying, wait a minute. Is this right? We're in at least one case, we're not passing it the poster.
There's an additional is required.
So you have to be explicit when it is required, otherwise it's optional. Okay. So we have to actually say in all cases, well, actually that is a required one. And we're going to say they're all required. So if we didn't say this, then it would think, it seems a little silly to me. I feel like optional should be the thing that you model, it should be required by default, and then you could be explicit if you want it to just be optional. But in this case, we say it's required. And if we don't say it's required, then if it's missing, if it doesn't match, but it's just missing, then that is considered okay. But now we're saying we expect, does anyone know, do I have to say is required here? Like what if I just gave it nothing?
You shouldn't need anything on that prop type statement.
Okay. Well, anyways, we're saying that the inventory item takes prop types. It expects exactly one thing called film data. We're just going to have a shape, title, poster, IMDb ID, all of type string, all required. So now we're going to save that. And then we see the error, which is the right error, saying one of the things you said was required, you just never provided. So that's pretty useful because it's a good way for us to catch this situation where we thought we had something, but we didn't. And of course, if I give it, even if it's a bogus data, even if it's a bogus, piece of data, that's not actually going to render as an image. The fact that it's a string is enough. So you'll see now we're not getting an error. We're just seeing a broken image there. So that's worth seeing just to see the limits of a type system that we've only been able to specify so much and say, I expect these all to exist as, prop names. And then I expect them to have a certain type, which is a string, but I wasn't able to say, for poster, let's say, and that type better be, at least a valid URL. And even more so that it's a URL that I can actually visit. Like you can't be totally explicit with type stuff, whether it's prop types or TypeScript. There's going to be a limit to what you can actually specify, a guarantee about. But at least saying that it has a certain type and that it exists is pretty powerful in its own right. So yeah, what do we think about prop types so far? Anything we want to see with prop types? As you can see, the API gets pretty involved in that you can say some things are optional. You can say something as an instance of a certain object, a certain class that you created yourself. You can say something is an array of, so you could say like it's an array of numbers, for example. So there's anything you might want to test to be true or not. It is possible to test. It's just a matter of learning this API a little better. So, I mean, I think this is an interesting one right here that like prop types one of. So I met, like, let's say I had this, inventory item, and for each inventory item, I gave it some, I think I could just, it's just going to be a value here where I can say like this represents some thing about it. So maybe I would say like, maybe I can say like, actually, you know what? I think I have a good example, which is if I look inside of here, I can see that all of my things have a rated, and rated only has certain values. So maybe I'm going to give my thing down here also a rating. I'll just give it a rating, which is, PG. That's what I imagine it probably is. So they all have a rating now. And of course, if I click in it, I would see that rating because we do actually show it. So that one's PG-13, PG-13, whatever. Even this one, we're seeing PG because I wrote it explicitly. But that's the sort of thing where like, I don't just care that it's a string. I care, I want to get a little deeper into it. And just looking at all my examples, I see, okay, PG-13, PG-13, PG-13. Do I have any that aren't PG-13? They're all, I guess a lot of PG-13 movies get made, but I can say something like, where is it? So if I go to inventory item, I can say like, okay, it's going to have something called rated. And what is rated? Well, rated is a prop type dot one of. Prop type types dot one of. Okay, and then what does that take? Well, it takes a list of values it can be. So we're being explicit. We're not saying, oh, it has to be a string, because we want to, we want to prevent bogus data from showing up there. So we can say, well, actually, there's only a couple values it can be. It's either going to be PG or PG-13 or R. I don't know what the other ratings are, but that's enough given what our things are. And we're saying if it's not one of these, there's going to be, a problem. So I save this and I go here and I'm still seeing no errors. But let's try this out now, where let's say I said the rating was bogus. That's not an official rating according to what we did. I save and yep, I get an error and it says, hey, for film data.rated, you said it was going to be one of these three and it's not. So we call that concept an enum. Again, that concept is like pretty strongly built into TypeScript, but the fact that you can get it with prop types is really nice because, I mean, with these few tools we've shown you, you can basically guard any of your components to say, here's what I expect, required, not required, the type, maybe specific values if it only can have a few values. And that is enough to sort of specify what good input versus bad input to a component looks like. And then let's just see, let's say I take it out entirely and I click save, then there is no issue. And that's because I didn't say something like is required probably. And if I do, now we have an error saying, well, no value is not a valid one of these either, because it has to exist. Cool. So that's prop types. I'm going to look at the chat quick. Francisco, anyone else, if anyone wants to. I see Dan is talking. See, I honestly get confused sometimes when you guys are asking real questions or making jokes like this. Do you prefer 2, 3, or 4 blade props? Is that a real question? I don't know what that means.
It's a fairly
Aviation.
even split here.
What is that?
Aviation humor.
Okay, exactly right. It's some kind of joke, and I don't know what it means, but cool, y'all. So Dan is saying prop size is new to me, wanted to clarify. I would say the majority of developers these days are using TypeScript, but that is because in the real world, people tend towards the most like production ready tools. And there's an upside to that where TypeScript can do all sorts of things involving typing and guarantees like this. The downside is it's much more to learn. PropTypes is this, really contained little thing. So I think it's just
a follow-up question. Nobody is doing, or I shouldn't say that like this, but like it is inefficient to both implement prop types and also be typing in TypeScript.
Yes, exactly.
Got it. Okay.
Once you choose TypeScript, now you have a full-on solution that is built into your language.
Yes, understood.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas PropTypes is just a library that says, hey, you care about types in this specific situation that has to do with React. We can give it to you for that, and it's pretty easy buy-in. And notice we didn't have to learn this like type system. Maybe we did it on some level, but we're doing it all just in regular JavaScript like we know it. Cool.
The last one other thing that I wanted to ask, Ben, if you have can you demonstrate how to use types or prop types with a promise when conducting Axios calls, as far as what we expect for the response?
That's a great question. I don't believe we can do that with prop types because and that's a good point, that prop types is a little too specific. It's saying, hey, we can, do this for components, but if you're, making an API request and then you're expecting some response, you might want to type that. And yet I don't believe prop types buys you that. So honestly, everything I'm hearing implies that we should be teaching you TypeScript at this point, and I would be happy to do that. We just kind of have to find some time in the curriculum to do that. But yeah, at least we can see the value of typing here, and we like bought a little bit of it. And then by the time we get to TypeScript, you'll see how you can type everything. You can get guarantees for everything. It's just a matter of how much effort you want to put into talking this type language and being precise about what you want. Because of course, in JavaScript, you always have this idea of any. So I don't know that prop types will allow it, but like, I don't think there is a prop type.any. Maybe there is. Let me check. If I say .any, yes, there is. So I could say something like this. And what I'm saying here is, title, as long as it's required, it's okay, but it could have type any. So if I just said 1 over here, it still would work. I think it's complaining about something else, right? Prop film data.rated, right? Exactly. So I'll get rid of that by just adding rated PG. So we have no error now, even though my title is 1. Funny because 65 is also a number, but this is, passed to it as a string. I'm actually just passing a number here. It's not caught in any way because I'm saying it has type any, and that's the big problem with types in JavaScript, that by default, everything has type any, and it doesn't care what you do if everything can be any. And so, TypeScript is just a way to say, actually, like basically the big design flaw of JavaScript is that it doesn't break when you do weird stuff. And TypeScript makes it so that it does break when you do things that violate your own definition of what is valid versus what is weird.
Yeah. One last useful field that you could see other than is required. If you do is required and then but nullable afterwards of is required, you can also set the field so that you can accept a nullable value. And this is going to come in handy whenever you're working. For example, when you're using your user, it's just all one word in capital letters, no dot.
Oh, it's one word after is required?
Yes.
Like is required, and then there's a type called is required not
Yeah, and then
nullable,
capital B, but nullable.
but nullable. Okay, I'm not interesting. I wonder why it's not auto completing anyway, but okay. So we have something called is required but nullable.
Right. And that's going to allow you to have, for example, whenever you're working with user authentication with Django, you're going to initialize the use state of the user as a nullable value. But if you're passing them as props into other components or other pages, which more than likely you won't, you'll use context for that, if I'm correct, right, Ben?
Say that one more time.
If you're trying to pass the user to all your other pages and components, you would try to use context for that. But in the case you're trying to pass something that should have the ability to be nullable, you could use this field to ensure that IMBID will get passed, whether it's nullable or it's a string.
Yes, and so is required but nullable means that that value can also be null.
Correct.
Okay, got it. So what we're saying here now is that in this case, like, okay, I'm passing in a string here. If I were to pass a number like 1, and then I look at it, it's going to say, you know, we don't like that because IMDb ID is not allowed to be a number. But if I were to say null, you're saying it should be okay with that.
Right. MVD is invalid, must be function.
We're getting an odd error for that.
Hmm.
Which is why I mean, we can, of course, look into this further. If I say here, and this is at least a way of demonstrating the fact that for like not every library is going to have great docs. And so often the best you're going to get is I mean, yeah, you can get into a situation where pretty quickly you're having trouble finding sort of information you're looking for.
Yeah, it comes from a separate library called Better PropTypes.
Okay, so that's actually our answer, that there is something called is required but nullable in PropTypes, but some other people made a, you know, made a library that just extended it further, which is, you know, fair. And of course, you know, no one has to use PropTypes or whatever this other one is, you know, someone could use that library. But, you know, just think of it in terms of it being a tool. So, yeah, so it looks like, right, exactly. I wouldn't be able to get that specific functionality like this. Okay, well, that's PropTypes at least. If we're good on PropTypes, I feel like I'm personally ready to move on to further hooks. So without having created a Slido poll, I'm realizing I should like create all those in advance. Do we feel okay moving on to hooks? Do we have any more questions about PropTypes or its usefulness? I'll check the chat first quickly. I find that's nothing new in the chat. Okay. So I think the next thing I want to talk about after I take out PropTypes, like or I'm just not taking it out, but I don't need to look at it anymore. If I come back here, the next thing I want to talk about is some of our hooks. So let me just copy this and so I have something to look at. So use context is another built-in hook, and we have not talked about it yet. It's pretty important. It's pretty important mostly just as a convenience feature, but you will see that that convenience feature, even if we can't demonstrate it perfectly, it's very useful. And the reason we can't demonstrate it perfectly is because use context becomes useful as your app gets like very large, basically. And our app is not that large. It's kind of difficult to mock being large. You just have to create lots and lots of files with lots and lots of, you know, they're within each other and stuff. But let's see how we might do this. So, okay, so let's say I'm in a situation right now where, you know, I sort of have this thing here where we have our router, let's say, and our router has app here, and app has outlet, which is replaced with, let's say, homepage, and then homepage has inventory item. So we kind of do get sort of deep, right? And let's say there was something that was at the level of app in the form of state. So let's say I had something like, okay, here I have my app here. I'm realizing it's gonna make my life annoying having to integrate this with React Router. So I might just make another thing here to say, okay, when I'm on app, we're always going to show a specific inventory item, let's say. Does that make sense? I just kind of want to show this with sort of dummy components almost. So let's just say I'm gonna make up my own component. So I'm gonna call it sub component. It's just gonna be this generic subcomponent we use for this purpose. And of course I would have to import it. So first let me make it. I'm gonna make something called subcomponent.jsx. And I'm just making a normal React functional component. So export default function, I call it subcomponent. And for right now, it doesn't take anything, but eventually it will take props. Might as well put it in there. And we're just going to return something for now, which, we'll set ourselves up for success. And in there, we'll just say, for right now, we're just going to say like, h1 subcomponent, and we just want to see it render. So I'm saying that app will always have underneath outlet. Might as well make it on top so that we can always see it. And we have to actually grab that. So import subcomponent. Okay, so let's just test that this works now. Here's my subcomponent, right? And what's my? I want to stop with the. I just want to get rid of those errors if I can. So I'm going to go down to inventory item, and which one is having an issue with? The PropType.
I think it's the number 1 that you might have left behind on the fake inventory item that we created.
Okay, so on home page, right? I just want to get rid of this entirely. Got it. Okay, great. So I'm just doing this to show that we have this thing called subcomponent, right? And okay, so just closing some stuff so it's a little simpler. So we have app right here and we have subcomponent. And let's say in app, I had something at the top level, like a use state, right? So I'll do this in order to get it. Great. Now we have use state in here. Move to the top here. And I'll have something like const, it could really be anything because it's just for demonstration purposes. I'll say I have something called name and set name. And I'm going to say use state, and it's going to start out as an empty string. Okay. And let's say I have this like subcomponent, and the nature of this subcomponent is that it is going to, we're going to destructure these props. So I'll have something like, const equals, and what are we grabbing off this props? We're going to have name and set name, let's say. But let's say for whatever reason, just for demonstration purposes, we don't even do it here. We're gonna have something called subcomponent. So I have something called subcomponent. I'm just gonna take out that copy business. Okay, and the subcomponent is its own component. And we're gonna import that from here. Like import subcomponent. And I might have that here. Subcomponent. This is all going to come together in a second. And let's say finally in this subcomponent, I'm going to have something where I say something like, okay, well, we're going to have an input. Something like this, input, and its type is going to be I'm forgetting right now, text, right? And it's going to have a value equal to name. So it's going to be tied to whatever is passed in as name. And then we're going to say on change, every time it's changed, we're going to call this function, which takes an event. You can make this a little nicer. And we're gonna, in response, say set name to event.target.value. And so we kind of have this issue now where, I mean, ignoring these errors for a second, basically I have this subcomponent and I want it to rely on these two props, name and set name. But those, for whatever reason, because, you know, other components need that access too, it doesn't live here. It doesn't even live one level above. It lives a level above that. So app contains a subcomponent. And we're actually going to have to say, and this is what is called prop drilling, that I have this subcomponent, right? So up here I'm defining name and set name, and then I have this subcomponent, and I'm going to pass name and set name as props down one level. And then I go here and I got to do the exact same thing because it's not this component that needs it. It's a component below it. So once again, name and set name equal to set name. And then finally, we get all the way down here and we actually use them, right? And so if I reload this, I believe this will actually work now. And you can't really see it working, but let's say all the way up here at app, we're actually going to say something like, you know, right after our subcomponent, we'll just print out, you know, we'll have a little paragraph there with the name. Okay, so basically, when I type here, this is happening in the subcomponent, and yet because of where we want to read the data lives, including the, you know, set name function, all that lives at the app level. So this is only two levels, but this is what we call prop drilling, as in I had to pass name and set name to subcomponent. And subcomponent doesn't even use name and set name. It just passes it to subcomponent, and then subcomponent actually uses them. And so this works fine. But you can imagine that if you had tons of props and you had levels and levels of your hierarchy, this would get very annoying very fast because you would just have so many props that you're passing around just so you can get them lower down, right? So, and Dave is saying that I'm not understanding prop drilling caused a not insignificant loss of time. I'm very curious, Dave, what your experience was, as in, was the issue that you assumed it would know automatically, or what was it?
I don't remember exactly now, but it was, you know, it was just one of the things where it just wasn't passing something through, and I didn't realize it, and I was looking everywhere and trying to figure it out. I didn't realize that it had to pass from one component to another and then to the component that I wanted until much later.
Yeah. Okay, fair. Well, the first thing to note is that the way we are doing it right now works perfectly fine. It does work. It's just the case that we could see how this could get very verbose very fast. We're going to be writing a lot of code that it's not really meaningful. It's just there because it has to be there because we don't know how else to do this. And it's sort of like, it's like a waterfall, right? It's like every component needs to pass it to the next level, to the next level, to the next level until it actually gets where it needs to go. And it almost like starts to take away from the value of props, because when you look at the props, you want to be able to say like, oh, subcomponent takes the props name and set name. Well, I guess it relies on them. And the answer is no, it does not. It's just something below it relies on it. And it's just, you could see hopefully how this won't be a good pattern long term. And like lots and lots of things in computer science, you only see the problem when you really scale up. So like in our case, we don't really have a problem yet. Even in a pretty large project, you might not have a problem yet. But once you're at like Facebook scale, you're going to have a massive problem if this is your only solution, because you know, how much of your time is going to go to, or just how many props is each component going to take if it has to have all the props of all of its children. All right. So this is where use context comes in, and let's see how we use context. Well, first we're going to go where we define this state, for example. And the first thing we're going to do is wherever we, you know, same place we got use state from React itself, we're going to get use context, which you can see is here. And okay, let's see. I want to see an example where we're starting with nothing. I think I understand what theme context is. Right. Yeah, we can just create something like null, right? Well, I'm getting slightly confused with this, but I think this is the example I want, right? Like, so I'm able to say theme context dot provider. I'm finding these docs a little strange, but we can try it out and see what happens. Because this reference is supposed to be everything we need to know. So it seems like first things first, I use context, and what does context get passed? I find does anyone else find these docs a little confusing? Like, why would they use something that they haven't defined directly? Sorry about this, 1 second. Are they where are they defining that? They must be defining that somewhere, right? Do I need to first use create context? I think so. And where do we get create context from? From React itself. Okay, got it, got it. So there's actually two functions. One is not a hook, it's just called create context, and it allows us to wrap something in a context. And so at this top level in app, I could say something like, and I think actually maybe use context comes lower. So I could say something like create context. And what am I going to give that context? Well, maybe I will give that context. I think I can do this, right? I can give it a name. I can actually give it those values, name and set name. And that is going to be the context that this context holds. And I'll call it something. I'll just call it, name context. And then how do we use it now that we've created this context? Well, the context takes two forms. It's going to have something on it called dot provider first. So this is the component that is going to wrap everything else that can access this context. So in this case, I'm going to say, when I see that, I might want to actually give it a capital there because that it is sort of a component. So instead of just having subcomponent here, I might actually say, well, actually, I want to have this thing called name context dot provider. So I'm going to open and close that. And in there, I'm going to put subcomponent. And note that when I put subcomponent here, I take this out. I just get to say subcomponent. And I see it can take a value. I think value is what gets put here. I'm honestly getting a little confused by this. I don't remember it looking like this. Something might have changed slightly. Why is that happening? But hopefully this is at least useful to see how someone might look at a slightly new API in real time. Okay, I definitely want to pass up both name and set name. I'm really not sure if this is the right way to do it or not. And this. just making sure here, like, why do you need to give it a default value if you have to pass value as well? Like I'm saying, okay, this is a good example here. We have a current user, we're using useState to actually create an object, and then we're passing that value there. We're not passing set current user, so the implication is it gets passed another way. Okay, we're just gonna see if this works. I'm gonna hit save. I do expect things to be broken right now because first I need to go to subcomponent and say, well, whether it takes props or not, we're not actually grabbing that thing off the props anymore, and we're not passing it like this. So this is kind of the essential point that in this case, I have this subcomponent, but this subcomponent does not need to be remotely aware of these two values that are provided in the context, or that we're trying to pass in the context right now. And it's only the component that finally uses it at the end of the chain. But again, it's not props. Instead, it is use context. So in that case, I can say use context here. Let me actually grab it. Import use context. Okay. And how do we use context? Well, just like the other ones, it's going to be a top level thing. And what goes in use context is the name of the context.
Well, it looks like when you created the context, you created it inside of the app
And I don't
component.
want to
No, you want to export it outside of the app
Oh, I see.
function.
Right. So it does seem like, right, exactly. The issue here is that I really want to put this, I see, okay. So it's almost like, and I'm just going to put this in components. We want to create something called name context, which is its own component. And let's just see if I can get this right by pulling it off of here. Okay, so actually in this component we're creating here, I want to do something like that. And I'm going to create the context like this. And I guess I'm just going to put null here initially. I think that's okay. And then I want to export default name context. Is that right?
You not default in case one puts other utils in here. You could
Right.
just put export right to the left of const. Or I guess this works actually.
I'm just going to do this for now, but this is basically still a component, and we're just giving it this blank context. And then in app here, I'm actually going to ask for that component. So I'm going to say name context. And we'll see if we get this right, because it is a little different than I expected. And then, okay, now here we have name context.provider, and then the value, I'm actually going to pass it this object here. So I expect it to have a name and a set name, and that's going to replace that null. And now if I go to subcomponent, now I should be able to use context, and I think I have to import name context in order to do that. And I think the reason why it is like this is because something might have access to multiple contexts at the same time. So I'm going to say use that context. And when I use that context, what is it going to give me? Well, it's going to give me an object. So I'm going to unwrap it. And the object is going to have something called name and set name. And now I'm curious if this works. So we're going to reload. We're not getting errors. Yep. Yeah.
I was saying, there you go.
Okay. And if I start writing hello here, it does work. So it does work. Might not seem that impressive. Often this stuff doesn't once it actually works. But the point here is that if I go back to app, I was able to do this provider thing and then simply pass it subcomponent. And if I look in subcomponent doesn't use the context, doesn't use props. It doesn't care about this data because it doesn't matter to subcomponent, but it does render subcomponent, and subcomponent does care about that context. So it grabs it. And this doesn't seem like much because we're really just skipping one layer. But you can imagine that if there were like 20 layers between where the data lived and where the data wanted to be rendered or updated, it would be very frustrating to use props to pass it. And so use context is simply a way to make all subcomponents aware of some data and then they can optionally choose to grab it using the use context hook. Yeah. So that's kind of all there is to that, but let's stay here and ask some questions if we want.
Does that have to go, does that have to be imported in the subcomponent? Or can it just skip the subcomponent and go straight to the subcomponent?
So subcomponent looks as if it has no idea about the context, which is good, because basically what it's saying is that if we look in app, we're saying everything below, everything within this provider should have access now to that use context hook for the name context, but it doesn't mean it has to use it. So subcomponent doesn't use it. And you can imagine we could have subcomponent could have something inside of it and something inside of it and something inside of it, and none of them use it. And it's only this bottom level subcomponent which does use it. Now, if this subcomponent ultimately was not within, if it wasn't nested within something with name context.provider, then I believe this would break. So if I try and do this exact same thing, but I go to app here, and let's say I'm just going to say like, well, actually we don't, we're not going to. We're going to take that line out, and we're going to take this line out. So we're just going to show subcomponent now. What happens now? Well, it says, it's going all the way to subcomponent. It says cannot destructure property name of use context as it is null. So I suppose what's happening is that when this resolves, it says, well, I'm not actually, within a provider for that. So that's just null. And then it can't get anything off of it. And because it can't get anything off of it, it throws an error. And because we're using React Router, that sends us to our 404 page. But as long as we, it is contained within a provider, it will work as expected. And once again, it's just there to allow you to skip having to do this prop drilling thing with intermediate components. So its usefulness really only appears obvious when you have a really large, really deeply nested project.
Okay. The next question is, why is it name context dot provider and not just name context?
It's a great question. So if we look here, you'll see that the reason why is that I think this goes back to the definition, which was great context. Basically, this is a problem that sometimes like APIs update slightly. And so the last time I used context, it works slightly differently. And not only did you have this provider component, you also have this consumer component. And that used to be the way that you would, grab whatever was provided by the provider. But now that we have hooks, we do it a different way. So that's the only reason. The only reason is because there used to be a .consumer, which was just as important as the .provider, but the .consumer part has now been replaced with a hook called use context.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then just real quick in the chat, they're asking for a rundown of how we actually created the use context component along with the provider itself. Do you want to cover that real quick, Ben, or do you want me to go over it?
If you feel comfortable going over it, you can. I do want to understand the question a little better.
Yeah, so it says, now that we have it set up, can you just give a brief rundown of the steps we did to have the subcomponents pulling the contacts?
Okay, well, I can cover this, which what I would say is, so we had a few steps. The first is that it seems a little odd, but we actually did create a new component, and it just looks like this. We'll see why we made it a separate thing, but basically we wanted to make it so that there was this thing that called name context that is separate and exported that we can use, but we just gave it an initial context of null, which just means it holds nothing. And this is where we created this component named name context, and then we imported that with app.jsx, and then it looks like this, where we say name context dot provider, and that's the actual component that we need to wrap whatever we want to be aware of this name context. And then value here would be the initial value that this context holds. So by default, this context holds something called null. It's not so useful. We actually want it to hold this specific object. And then we have the subcomponent, which is inside of here. And this is actually the use case that we don't have any information about the context here, but rather we can go deeper. And then once we're deeper in here, we're able to use the hook use context, but importantly, it has to know which context you mean. So we import that same context and then we peel it off. So does that answer the question of how it works? Okay, we feel good about it. Okay, great. And I would even say, like, now that I'm looking at this again, I can see that maybe, like, I think Francisco was trying to tell me this, but maybe we don't want to do it this way. Let's say I'm going to get rid of name context as a separate component, but rather I'll go to app and say, okay, well, just want to grab all this data. So we're saying, okay, well, you know, app is where we're going to define this component. I believe we can define it outside of any kind of component. And then we could just say export in the front of it. I was told this would work. Does it work? Can you use export like that?
Yeah, you can. It's just that default parameter that you're passing on line 9. So if you use default, it only exports one function in the file.
Yeah.
If you take off the default, it'll be able to do both.
Well, no, I think you can do both anyways. It's just that so right now we're now exporting it from here. And now if I go to subcomponent, and obviously this isn't real anymore. So the issue, I believe, is that if I go to where I actually want to grab this, I go to where I want to actually grab this. Well, we're going to go to, you know, /app, and we saw in app that we export default function, which means that if I were to say something like import, you know, I could say import app from that, but we actually have a second thing which looks like this and says, well, actually, that's anything that was exported that wasn't default. So in that case, something called name context. We want to do that essentially. We're saying this is, you know, I just wanted to show that you could theoretically do something like this, in which you grab both the thing that was exported default and as many things as you want that were exported not default. But because we don't care to export what was or to import what was exported default, we just do this. And now this, I believe, should work. And it does appear to be working. Yeah. So I think this is how we would actually do it, that wherever we define the context, we just export it there. What exactly is the issue? App has already been, oh, oops, I tried to, I don't know what happened here. Okay. So I believe it is working, and that was just a weird typo. Right, we're exporting it here, the same place that we define it. And then this is where we have the provider. And then where we use it, that's where we have to grab wherever it was defined so that we can pass that as the input to use context. Okay. So that is use context. I see you guys are asking for a break. We will break in approximately 2 hours. I'm kidding. We are going to break now. Let's come back. I guess let's just take questions or something for the next 3 minutes. If you have it on, you can leave early, but we're going to come back at 10:30 a.m. CST. So if you want to leave now, you can, but I'll be here for the next few minutes to take any questions. And when we come back, we've covered use context. I'm going to start polling you guys for this because it's a little more, like, we could technically cover a lot more, but I do want us at least see this concept of use callback. I think we can skip use memo. It's very related. They're both just ways of re-rendering if necessary. And then we'll see use ref. How about that? And then MUI if there's time. All right, cool. See you guys in a bit. I'm still here for questions for the next few minutes, but we will stop sharing.
Yeah. So if you grab something with use context,
Mhm.
and you destructure, you pull off whatever you want, can you then pass that thing as a prop, like one level? You know what I mean?
Yeah, interesting. So you're saying like we have subcomponent that got its context, right?
Yeah. So like right there, you got name and set name. So could you pass name and set name from that component that we're staring at
Yeah, I believe.
into a sub component?
Yeah,
if you-
first of all, I'm very excited to write something called sub component. You know what? Actually, to be simpler, maybe I'll just start writing sub 3. Okay, this is sub
Sure.
3 component.
I'm just
And-
thinking like if you know it's only going to go one level down, it might be easier to just pass it as a prop.
Yeah, well, so it may well be possible. What did I do wrong here? It may well be possible, but it doesn't really make sense, like the situation, just because why wouldn't, like, basically once you're using context, everything below it can just access it through the context. So why even pass it as a prop when the thing
Right,
below it, no
okay.
matter how many levels, can just use context again? If you want me to check with you,
Oh,
it's an
I mean,
interesting
honestly,
question.
it's more just the idea of why would you ever use props when you
I
can?
think the reason you would use props is it's almost like props is a simple abstraction for simple situations. So you don't always need this heavy duty context idea. Maybe you really do just need to pass something down one level. Props is a great way of doing that. And everything is also
Right.
like, I guess the answer is sort of like props is a core building block. So use context almost certainly uses props under the hood.
Right.
So props are sort of this core idea that you can understand, and then context is a much later invention to say, oh, we noticed that props, while they are a good solution, they kind of don't scale that well in terms of like, this whole prop drilling thing. So let's make an additional solution for that specific case. That's the best
Gotcha.
answer I have.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. The Dan had shared what he was working on this morning during a stand up, and he like really strategically nested his providers
Mhm.
so that like not everything had access to everything.
Yeah.
So is that a concern where, like, let's say you have some user information and you don't want other things to have access, you need to be careful about how you have your providers laid out to prevent
Yeah,
that
essentially.
data?
Dan doing that is a wise thing to do, because the general rule is like, okay, so this isn't an issue with like users, having access to data. It's really just about, if you have a team of programmers, one way you could do it is say, okay, we have a top level context and it has all the information. And anytime there's a change to it, everything re-renders in response and everything has access to everything. And that works, but it's almost like, think about a company where like literally every single person has a key to the doors off to the CEO's office. Is that really what we want? We probably want a system where the CEO has a key to his office, and maybe the CEO has a key to everyone else's office, but everyone else doesn't have the key to his office. And so like separating, like not just with use context, but with data in general, there's some kind of principle that goes like, you should only have as much information as you need to have. We shouldn't be passing you information that we then say, hey, don't use this because this isn't for you. We shouldn't be giving it to you if it's not for you. And
Yeah, that makes sense. And what you said about re-rendering makes sense too, because if everything has access to everything and you're re-rendering all the time, then what's the point of React as a whole?
Exactly.
It's supposed to limit the re-render. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And that approach where like everything is in the context, everything's in the context and there's a single provider at the top level, that is totally legitimate when you're like prototyping and figuring stuff out, because you just want it to work for now. But at a certain point, you will care about efficiency, especially if your product is successful. And then at that point, you don't want to do things that way. You want to say only re-render when the data you care about, that you actually need to re-render, changes. Otherwise, you should be blissfully unaware. Cool. So any other questions, or should we pause for now and come back in 13 minutes? Jody is saying, can you show app.jsx for a second? Sure. Are you still here, Jody? Suppose not. Okay. So I'm just going to stop sharing for a minute and stop recording for a minute. All right. So we are back. Just as a reminder, what we have covered in the last hour before this, we talked about prop types. We talked about the use context hook. And that is it so far. So I feel like those are the only two really essential things, but I did want to get a sense of direction from you guys. Like if there's specific things we want to talk about. If you don't have answers, I would personally touch use callback and use ref first, but I do want to get feedback. All right, nothing in the chat and nobody is giving me a direct answer. So I guess we will cover use callback. So what is use callback? It's another hook. Oops. These are pretty good docs in general. So let's just read what it says. It's a hook that lets you cache a function definition between re-renders. So what does this mean? If we look here, we can see that, here we have this simple product page component, and within it, we define a function called handle submit. In this case, they are using this use callback, and they pass entire function here, which does something. And then there's also, just like use effect, a dependency list, which says if either of these two things change, then rewrite this function. So why are they doing this? Well, let's look at an example of ours. So let's see if I have a good example here. I have app here. Where's another place? Well, I could say perhaps in this homepage, let's just say that in this homepage, I have another component, which is some kind of form. I'm just sort of copying their example. So I have some kind of form, and we're just going to give it, a single input of type text. And I mean, this is just an example, so I'm just going to put it here. But the point is that this entire form is going to have, it's going to have a button for the sake of submitting. So it's going to look like button submit. And then we say type equals submit. I believe that's how you do it. And then the entire form can have an on submit. And we're going to define that as on submit handler, which we will now define up here. So maybe right here, I said, const on submit handler equals a function that takes an event. That event would be, whatever we are submitting. And right now I'm just going to say something like console.log event. I just want to see that this is a function, and let's see it working. So down here I have this, and I can just going to type hello into my input and hit submit. And yeah, I see like it reloaded automatically. So maybe I want to say event dot stop propagation. Am I getting this right? Right, Cisco?
It means prevent default.
It's a prevent default.
It's a prevent default. Okay. What I'm surprised it's not auto completing. I guess I'm used to TypeScript, but we'll try that one more time. I'll just type some stuff. I hit submit, and then we actually got this submit thing, and there's some stuff in there. There's a target, there's an input. So maybe I just say something like console.log event dot target, and we specifically care about the first thing in there, which is this input, and then it has a value. So dot value. So I just want to see this working, that I can say hello, and I submit, and I see hello. Great. So what is on callback? Well, something you might notice here is that every single time, like let's say I see we don't have any kind of use state here, but let's say we had a use state. And I'm going to define that use state, just say something like, name, set name equals to use state, empty string. And let's say in response to submitting, might as well, in response to submitting, I'm going to call set name like this, right? And then I suppose we'll print name somewhere. So right below the form, I'll just have something like pre name. And yeah, I might want to edit, or I might want to blank out this button as well. So maybe it'll be like, this also has a value equal to name. And so, never mind, it's not really worth it. Just for demonstration purposes, let's understand what our errors are. I tried to get use state from the wrong place. Good point. The use state would come from React. Or use state. Here we go. So let's see, now we're still getting issues. I wonder why. I did say
because you have use state twice, I think, on line 1 and 7.
Got it, yeah, just some kind of, right. Okay, cool. So right now I have a situation where I have this use state and it's set to blank, and then I have name and set name. And then if I start typing here, nothing actually changes with the use state, but once I hit submit, the on submit handler happens, it updates set name, right? So this works, this totally works. But if you dug in a little under the hood, what you would see is that, we just re-rendered the page. And what that means is essentially that we're going to rerun everything inside the body of our component. And that includes things like this. So whenever something is a use state, you might have noticed that it's as if it's not rerunning this line, right? Because use state is run the first time to set a default, but if we re-render, name still has the value it has. We're not resetting it to be blank. That wouldn't make any sense. But if we re-render a component like homepage and it has a function like on submit handler, we're actually creating a brand new function and redefining it. And there's kind of two issues there. One, that's a total waste, and that on submit handler is the same function in terms of its functionality that it was before. Why are we throwing out a function and creating a brand new function with the same name, the exact same body, just because we re-rendered? Well, the reason is because React doesn't know that this doesn't need to be re-rendered. And that is exactly what use callback is. So another hook here called use callback. Let's just make sure that we have that API right. Exactly. So I'm going to grab that from here. And it takes a function and a list of dependencies. So something I can do is take use callback here, and then I take this on submit handler, and instead of saying on submit handler equals a given function, instead I wrap the whole thing in this use callback. So its first argument is that function. And then the second thing it takes is a list of dependencies. And that list of dependencies is what the trigger should be for re-rendering this function if we do want to. But for now, I'm going to say we never want to re-render this function. This function is always the same. So hit save. And what we should see is that nothing is different, right? Why did I do all that then? The reason is because this function I made here, if it was a much larger function, if it had more going on, the fact that every time I re-render, I'm redefining this function from scratch, that is wasted memory at the very least, probably going to waste some time. And there's just no reason you should have to do it. And use callback as a way of saying to React, this thing doesn't need a re-render, just like use state, doesn't get run again on a re-render. Use callback makes it so that whatever this function is, that's now set in place. It doesn't get, we're not creating a new copy every time we re-render. But of course, if we wanted to, let's say use callback, relied on something, maybe there was some, like in this example, let's say we did some kind of post. So let's say we had something like, you're using Axios and we said, well, actually we do some kind of like axios.get here. This is just an example. Obviously, this isn't really what we would want to do, but let's say we had an axios.get, we might have like, dot, slash name slash, and then at that point, we actually want to, include that name here. So we're going to make some kind of like, requests for some reason with this name. And then the idea is this, if we did it with the use callback and, we have this empty dependency list, what this is going to do is it's going to say, okay, we're creating this function for all time. It never gets changed on re-render. So whatever name was, which is, an empty string when it started, that's always what it's going to be. But if we want to make it so that this actually does re-render when something changes, we would say, okay, when the given value changes, now you re-render this function. And of course, because I'm doing set name in here, it's a little circular and that's not ideal. But the core point is just that use callback is a way, it's almost like use effect, but without, you're not explicitly triggering an effect. You're just saying like prevent any re-renders on this function unless something specific in the dependency list changes. And similarly, use memo is almost the exact same idea. So use memo is just going to say, we have some value, and that value is going to be given an initial value, whatever the output of running this is, and then we only rerun it when something like this happens. So it's almost like a use state that is that essentially doesn't re-render unless something in its dependency list changes. And that's the only point of use memo and use callback, which is to make something not re-render unless or not change in response to a re-render unless something in the dependency list has changed, or just to give you more fine-grained control over deciding whether you want to update something or not. So it's hard to really show the use case for these. It's really just about performance, and it's good to know about and have in your back pocket because you will hit situations in which something is rendering too much or not rendering as expected, and one way to gain more control over it is to wrap it in a use memo or use callback. Just really wanted to show it to you. But we can take questions now on use callback, let's say.
What was causing the on submit handler to re-render exactly before you use the use callback state?
What was causing it to re-render?
Yeah, so you use callback so it doesn't have to re-render, but without it, what would cause it to re-render?
Okay, so if I took out the use callback stuff like this, what I mean is that like if something happens like set name is called, right? Set name is going to change, and now name will have a new value, but part of that is that this whole component homepage re-renders. And what does that mean when it re-renders? Well, it's going to rerun all the code, and then it's also going to it's going to run this and return possibly new JSX. So if we don't use callback, every single time that we re-render homepage, we're actually defining a brand new function called onSubmitHandler. Does that make sense? As in, we're defining, it's almost like we had something called onSubmitHandler, but it was part of the body of, homepage. And then when we rendered it, when we re-render, we're now going to define a brand new thing called onSubmitHandler, unrelated to the previous one, except it has the same name and the same body. But in memory, it's a brand new thing. So basically, onCallback is there because without it, we're constantly redefining things in memory every single time we re-render, and we probably don't want to do that in lots of cases.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so, I mean, yeah. I mean, that's basically it. We're just saying that instead of like when we don't have it, that's the equivalent of saying every single render, no matter what, if there was a re-render, recreate this function. Whereas when we have use callback, we're able to say either never re-render, like never redefine this function, only define it once and forever, or only when a specific value that I care about changes, do I then want you to redefine that function. So yeah, it's just there to give you more control over when, in this case, a function is redefined. And use memo is the same idea as use callback, but it's to give you more control, not of redefining a function, but redefining a specific value. And it's something that you should know about, but you generally won't see a use case for it until you hit some kind of weird bug, often when using another library. And then you'll say, oh, okay, this, maybe I gain a little more fine control over here by wrapping it in a use callback. Yeah, let me look at the chat quick. Yeah, so what Francisco's saying is right. The dependency list is only there because, I don't think I gave a great example here, but basically the dependency list triggers a redefining of that inner function, and you would only want to do that if you had some part of that inner function that depended on that value changing, because otherwise it would just have whatever its initial value was when it was initially defined. Yeah, I hope that's useful. I did worry with talking about use callback or use memo that it's a little too abstract. It's not easy to see the purpose of it. So maybe better to just move on now and go to use ref. Does that sound good to people? Sounds good to me.
One more question in chat.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's in chat.
Oh. What is the difference between use callback and use effect? It's a good question. I think it's a difference of what you're trying to get out of it. So with a use effect, what we're saying is, let's just define one. Okay, with a use effect, what we're saying is something like this. So use effect will take some kind of callback function, and then it also has our dependency list. And maybe I'll just say, console.log hello. So they both do rely on a dependency list. And we'll see here that, use effect, when we have this empty dependency list, it runs exactly once. And maybe I'll say something like this now, where I'll say, okay, I'm going to give it a name, or I'm going to print name, and I will put name in the dependency list here. So it will initially print name. And then if name ever updates, so if I start typing here and then I hit submit, because name, I don't, oh yeah, right, because of the Axios thing, that's not real. Let's just try that one more time. So we originally print nothing, and then I start typing in here. When I hit submit on here, that actually will call set name, which will trigger a re-render, which means that use effect will be called again because its dependency had a change. And so we see its functionality again. So use effect is a dependency list aware function. It's a function that is only called. It's a function that is called when use effect, when something in that dependency list changes. Now, what is on callback, or what is use callback? Use callback, instead of running a function in response to a change to the dependency list, it redefines a function in response to the dependency list. So notice that when we did use callback here, we didn't call on submit handler here. We just redefined it, and it ends up being called over here. So it might seem like a very nuanced difference, but basically there are times where, based on some change in the dependency list, you want to redefine a value. There are times where you want to redefine a function. There are times where you want to execute a function. So all these things that you might want to do in response to a dependency list have their own callbacks. But yeah, that's my answer. So for whoever asked that question, because I don't see your face on the screen right now, is that a satisfactory answer, or? Can we get a reminder who asked the question?
Yeah, we got a thank you for it.
Oh, right, they're in chat. Sorry about that. I forgot it was asked in chat. Yeah, and so they all, you could see they're not too different. Use effect does something in response. Use callback redefines something in response. But they're both there because without them, React would not know to either redefine or rerun this thing in response to a change, or alternatively, it would redefine or rerun the thing every single time, and we don't want that either. So it's a way to gain control over something between never re-rendering and re-rendering every frame. So you're trying to get that fine control to say only re-render when it's meaningful, or only redefine or only rerun when not just in response to a re-render, but in response to a re-render that I specifically care about as defined in the dependency list. Cool. I'm going to look at chat again to see if there's another question. Nope, there isn't. Francisco just linked to that. So do we have any more things we want to talk about use callback before moving on to use ref? Sounds like no. And I do want, maybe I can ask Francisco, we should get some feedback from the students for the rest of the class, because at this point, this is sort of our last pure React day. And I'm just trying to fill in the details, but it's not, I really want to know what students think might be important, or what they maybe have been reading about and they don't know what it is, but it seems useful, or just kind of anything in the React world that you think is important, because otherwise I'm just going to go with what I think is useful, but you might not actually encounter a use for this right away.
Part of the problem I think I have answering that adequately is I don't really know yet what I'm going to find useful.
Yeah.
Once I start working on my personal project, I'll come up with a lot of like, well, how could I do that questions? But I'm just not sure yet.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough. Which is a good argument for me, just like showing more of this stuff that I think is meaningful.
Yeah,
so
could you oh, I'm so sorry. I'm pretty sure you already covered the async and await functionality as well with Axios calls, right?
well, do you mean something specific? Like when we covered use effect, we did do Axios stuff, and we showed that async await is a possible pattern that it can work with.
Oh, okay, so something I struggled to understand was using asynchronous functions inside of use effect and how that works.
Yeah,
I'm sure that could be useful.
Yeah. Let's see that. So let's say I'm in here, and let's just say, right, I have a use effect. Let me just, might as well, Pokey API just to show an example of a use effect. Oh man, my keyboard just died on me. Give me a second. I have this wireless keyboard that never, don't worry, I have a backup keyboard. So I got 2 keyboards. But I have this one that runs out of battery, and if you plug it in, it only works in one outlet for some reason. When I try and charge it, it only works in the outlet in my bedroom. So let me see if I have typing power again. There we go. So what am I doing? Pokey API, which of course we're just using because it's accessible. So we just have, you know, this, oops, we just have this API we want to use. And let's say I'm looking for Pokemon by an ID. Let's just see that it works. I'm just going to say something like /1. Okay, I mean, this is good enough information for me. So right, do we have Axios here? We do. So I can say something like, okay, I have this use effect, and you know what, actually, we already have this name stuff set up, so I might as well say something like Axios.get. And what are we going to get? Well, we're going to get this URL here. And what we want to put in here is actually the name of the Pokemon. So that thing we have name is going to be here. And then of course we actually want to respond to the name change. And we also don't want to run it the first time when name is empty. So maybe I would wrap it in something like I would say if name, just ensuring that it's not empty. Okay, so just setting this up to show if I go to my site now, I'm going to reload. And this is on the home page, and nothing has happened yet because name was initially empty. And then I'm going to update my name to the hardest word to spell, Pikachu. I don't even know if I did it right. I do submit. And what happened in response to the submit? Well, I actually did do this Axios.get, but I didn't do anything with it. And we will get there. But for right now, I'm just going to say, okay, well, let me do this, you know, in the normal promise way where I'll say response. And then what do I do? Well, I'm just going to say console.log response.data just so we can see what's happening. I'm not even going to do a .catch or anything. So, okay, I go back here. I say Pikachu, enter, and then we did get something back. Okay, cool. So it is working. And as you can see, because of how we did the dependency list, if I now change this to Squirrel and I hit submit, we actually did another API call to Poke API, got some new data. So the question now is, how can I work with async, right? As opposed to doing .NET, is that correct? Cool.
Right.
So naively, I might say, okay, well, you know, use effect takes a function. Why not just make this an async function? So I might say something like, okay, I'm going to write async there. Because I wrote async there, I now have access to await. So I can say something like const response equals await. And then after we wait for the response, we can log it like so. And let's see if this works. And hit save. And I'm getting some errors. Let's see what they are. Use effect must not return anything besides a function which is used for cleanup. It looks like you wrote use effect async blah 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 or return a promise. So the problem it's having with this is that when we use async await, we don't realize that it's still using promises under the hood. And part of how it works is that this function that we're calling here, this async function, it returns a promise, and use effect doesn't like that. So how do we get around this? Well, we actually don't want to define this function as async because React doesn't like it. So instead we do something like this. And notice that if we take away that async, it says, hey, I don't know what you're talking about. I can't use await outside of async. So what we actually do is that inside use effect, we define a function. You can define a function anywhere in JavaScript, including within another function. So I could just say something like const, what I want to call this, you know, make Poke request. And I'm saying make Poke request is a function, and I'm going to say it's a function that takes nothing. And what does it do? Well, it does all of this. And I'm going to say it's an async function, so I can use a wait in there. Okay, so now I have this make pokey request, and it's a function that I'm defining in here, and React should be okay with that because this function that we're defining here, this function does indeed return a promise, but this function notably isn't the function we are passing to useEffect. And then how do we use this? Well, now we just call it down here. So I'll just say make pokey request like so, save, and now same deal. I can write squirrel, and we're doing it. And then I might say Nidomon. I don't remember them. Yeah, we got some kind of error because Nidomon is not a real Pokemon. I made that up, I guess. I could have sworn there was something like that. But this is basically the pattern. So you just define an async function within the useEffect or even outside of it, and you import it, but then you call it within this non-async function you pass to useEffect. So that's the pattern. So even though Francisco asked the question, Francisco, do you feel good about the answer?
I do. Thank you so much.
Okay. And feel free to, we should also use this time to refresh on anything we've covered so far, because like I can teach useRef, but useRef is like, you will see it, you will need it, or you will see it pretty rarely, whereas useState and useEffect really are, and to some extent useContext really are your bread and butter. You're going to see them all the time. So good understanding of those is really important, whereas you can work as a React developer for a fair amount of time before you encounter or need useRef. It's just good to know about for when you do need that. So any specific thing we want to talk about, or should I talk about useRef? Because as mentioned, very legitimately, you might not know what else, you might enjoy me talking about. Okay. Well, useRef is another one of these hooks. I can grab it over here. There's useRef. And how would I use it? If we scroll all the way to the top, we see that useRef is actually this pretty general thing. It lets you reference a value that's not needed for rendering. So how does that look? Looks like we're saying, okay, we have useRef 0, useRef null. So, just like useState, we're giving it an initial value, but notably there's no way to update it. So why even do this? Well, let's see. Yep, so this is true. Changing a ref is not going to trigger or re-render, just as if it was, not using useRef, but rather just using a, if we just said const interval ref equals 0, that also changing that would not trigger or re-render. So I'm not even sure why one would use a ref in this way. I only know a much more specific case, which they get to, about why we use a ref. Okay, I see. That's the reason why. Basically, when you re-render, you're going to overwrite something. So it's sort of like if I said something like const x equals 1, and then maybe when I click submit, for example, maybe I'm going to say, let's make it a let. So maybe there I'll say, and I'll call it count to give it something meaningful. So I'll say, okay, well, this function count has never been updated, but maybe I count how many times I actually click the submit handler. So I'm going to say count, plus equals 1 here. And then maybe, just I always, right after here, I'm just going to always say console.log count. And so what actually happens? Well, I'll see that first I'm printing it as 0. And then maybe I try and do like Pikachu, which I know is wrong. Okay. And so what happens? Well, I hit the submit handler. It set the name, or it tried to. No, it did. It's there. And then we updated count by 1. But importantly, because of set name, we actually re-render. And when we re-render, we redefine count to 0, right? So we didn't actually, even though we don't want to trigger a re-render, we did kind of want to keep this count, and we weren't able to do it. So if I add use ref now, I have use ref, which is a value 0, and it's really just an object with something called current in it. And now I can say count dot current plus equals 1. And then when we print it out, I'll say count dot current. I'm going to save it. And now I'll see that initially we have 0 here. And now we're going to submit one thing. So we do, but it breaks because I can't spell Pikachu, of course. But notice we are seeing 1 now. So the idea is no matter how many times we run this, we're able to see that count. And notice that that change doesn't trigger a re-render, but importantly, it also doesn't get overridden when we re-render. If we didn't have this, count would just keep getting reset to 0, whereas when we use ref, we're able to say, actually keep track of this value between re-renders, and you don't want to reset it back to its initial state. So that's the very basic functionality of use ref. But I mean, while you might want to use it for something like a count, you don't see that too often. The real use case for use ref is this: manipulating the DOM with a ref. So you see this pattern a lot where you say something like, maybe I would have something like this. And some people have mentioned this, like remember how we've done this where like I'm going to take, let's say I'm going to take set name out here, right? There's no more set name. So I guess there is no name, which, I mean, I'm just going to take some stuff out for a moment. I'm going to say 1 there. But we're taking this, we're just going to try and take the name stuff out, make sure it's not there, right? But I have this form. Okay, so I just want to see that I'm not getting errors right now. Okay, I feel good about that. I can take this out as well. Anything related. One second as I get us back to where we started. Just don't want to see unnecessary stuff. Okay, I feel good about this. So how are we going to use ref? Well, first we're going to create something like this. So we imported use ref, and now I'm going to say, okay, well, among my other hooks, I'm going to say there's this thing called input ref, and I'm going to originally going to give it a value of null. All right. And then in the input, we're actually going to have something here called ref. So this input here is able to take a prop called ref, which is built in for all components. And there I'm going to say input ref. And I'm going to save. And how does this work? Well, let's print out input ref. Okay, so we're going to save. And what we see first, I kind of want to stop doing this use effect just so that we don't have to keep seeing unnecessary stuff. We just want to care about this for right now. Get rid of that as well. Okay, so initially my ref is null. But I set it here to this input thing, and I should be able to after so let's say we click this on submit handler. How about in there? I'm going to say, okay, I have this event. Maybe I don't care, or I need the event for event.prevent default, but from within here, I want to say console.log input ref. And let's see that. So we're going to type some stuff, and then we're actually going to click submit. Now it actually holds something. And that thing it holds is the actual underlying element in the DOM. And so what that means is that like we showed you a pattern in the past where every single time you typed, we showed you this pattern in the past where you might have had a different input like so. And instead of doing something like this, we said like on change, and on change had a function, and it did something like set input value, and this would be like, event, and we would say set input value to event dot target dot value. And in this way of doing things, we had like some kind of like use state, and every time you typed, you updated it, and then eventually you might use it in some way. And people complained about that when you do it that way, every time someone types, you're re-rendering the component. That seems unnecessary, right? So this gives us an alternative now where I'm not going to do it like this. I'm going to do it like this, where I have this underlying ref where I'm saying like, okay, well, input ref, now, it will continue to be the same value between re-renders, but it points to the underlying reference of whatever input is, which is, a DOM element. And then once we're here in the onSubmit handler, now I can say something like console.log input ref dot current. And because it is an input element, I think I could just say value. And let's see what that is. So I'm actually, I type all this in here. I click submit. And let's see, we did actually see it now in the console. And so using this now without having to use useState or, re-render things unnecessarily, we can directly access that, underlying DOM element and its value, for example. And so now, on submit, even though on submit technically would have the event and could see it, when we call on submit, it's able to just get that value. So does that seem useful to people? Does that seem like something they might want, or have I sold the case for useRef?
It seems like a more efficient component.
Yeah. And that's it's kind of there's a give and a take to it where, yeah, definitely compared to using like useState and keeping track of something every time it changes, we're not unnecessarily re-rendering the page because, someone typed a new letter. And so, yeah, we're doing less work that way, and that seems good. The downside is that even though it doesn't seem so bad, on some level, we're breaking a contract in React, and it doesn't really matter so much when we're just reading something. But you can imagine it would, things could get real tricky if I start saying like, well, actually, I'm going to take that ref value, and maybe I want to say that value now equals, 44 or something. And so we can get ourselves in a weird situation where now someone can like change things without React, or it's not happening in the React way. And so useRef is sort of like a escape hatch from the world of React to just go back to the world of vanilla JavaScript. But what comes with that is the downside of, well, because it's vanilla JavaScript, someone can just change something out on you, and React doesn't know to update in response to that. You're literally manipulating this underlying thing below React's awareness. But it is useful because sometimes you have to often, and the real great use case for useRef is that if you have a certain project, maybe you'll find like, okay, we have a React project, but we need to use this specific jQuery library, right? That's the only library that will do what we want. It's a jQuery library. How do we integrate React and jQuery? Well, you can't really, except that with useRef, you can just get direct access to an element, and then you do whatever you want with it, just like it was vanilla JS or jQuery or, something operating not within the world of React. And Drew is asking, it seems cleaner, but ultimately doing the same thing. I would say yes, it is doing the same thing. Something I think you guys haven't seen that I just want to make sure I show you because it's sort of like a fun little React thing that it's worth seeing. Let's say I had a paragraph here. Can I just type lorem? Yeah, okay, cool. So I'm going to have a paragraph here with some lorem ipsum, right? And where is that lorem ipsum? I had it right under inventory. Wonder why it's not showing up. Because I didn't save it, maybe. Yep. Okay, so something that is the case is that let's say we actually didn't have a specific paragraph, but let's say it was passed into us like a prop or something. Or I mean, I don't really know. I guess I just want to show you like this example of this thing that is sort of related to useRef, which is there we go. So this is the most insane prop in React. I just love what it's named. Dangerously set inner HTML. So they're going out of their way to tell you this is dangerous. Don't do it this way. But the idea is that I have some component here, and when I say dangerously set inner HTML, I might be forgetting. I think I have to do this. I have to pass on an object with underscore HTML, and then in there I can just literally say like you know, my favorite marquee, and I'm literally just passing it as a string. So let's see this. Didn't quite like that. The above error occurred in P. Telling me what the error is. Maybe it's that it doesn't take a string, but rather HTML like that. Let's try that. Still doesn't seem to like it. Well, I'm just going to quickly look up what an example of dangerously set inner HTML looks like, because I don't remember it exactly. A underscore HTML, and then I mean, at the very least, let me just try putting the words hello world in there. Maybe it'll accept that as just like a text node of HTML. Okay, let's try that. It's still not working. I'm starting to think maybe they took this feature out of React because useRef is sort of its replacement. But yeah, I wonder, is it not part of React anymore? Dangerously set inner HTML React 16.8 or something. It's not really very important to know, but it's the easiest thing you have that is like useRef, which says just rewrite everything with whatever I give you. But that's a pretty dangerous thing, because what it means is that anyone can pass anything in there, and you're sort of like breaking this contract in React. I'm surprised it's not working. It seems like it should be working. Like here, we just have a div, and we're saying whatever data is here, just put it right in there.
Could you try taking off the body inside of that division that you're currently in?
Is that the problem? It doesn't want it to have a body if I'm about to rewrite the body. There's a good chance that is what it is. Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, now we're seeing hello world. But so much like useRef, dangerously set inner HTML is a way to just gain total low-level control of that actual element and rewrite whatever is inside of there. It seems like it does have some guards to say like, well, if there's something already inside of there, you can't just put whatever you want in there. But the reason why this is dangerous is because there is this idea called a cross-site scripting attack. And basically, you generally don't want to be in a situation where you just say, like, if this was a variable, or maybe this was a value I was getting from like, you know, calling some API and it just returns HTML. If I just say, yeah, whatever HTML you have, just pop it in there, there's some weird things a person could do that might be malicious to the user, and React would not allow these things. But with dangerously set inner HTML, you can literally put whatever you want there. And it's the same thing with useRef. With useRef, you've now exposed this underlying thing, and anything we now do to input ref will indeed, you know, change what's there. So again, it's kind of hard to see the use case or why this matters, but the point of introducing you to useRef is that generally, if you its general use case is as a backdoor to get direct access to the DOM element that is represented by, you know, some JSX element. All right, well, that is that. I mean, that's all I wanted to say on useRef. Do we have questions about hooks up until this point? Because we're going to give you a break in a minute, and then when we come back, we'll just talk more about how about MUI? Because MUI will give you a fair amount of bang for your buck. So any questions about hooks before we break? Okay, I see some stuff in the chat. Jody wants to skip break. Well, Jody's in charge. No, I'm going to override him, and we are going to take a break for 10 minutes. And we'll come back at 10:30 or 11:30 CST. And then for the next half hour, we'll talk about MUI, and then we'll talk about the assignment, which is just, build it out further. Cool. So we'll see you guys in 10 minutes. How's everybody? Everybody doing? See, Mickey wrote something interesting in the chat, which is that there is a good hook apparently as part of React Router called use route loader data, which lets you do something. Do you want to talk about it, Mickey?
I can. I wanted to throw it in there because I was bringing up that question about how to just load it the one time and then to use it and pass it down.
Yeah.
What was it? So we were talking about children of children the other day. So I decided to retool my list versus detail into two childs of the parent. That way it would preserve the state from each one. And I started throwing in the loaders so that I would have the Axios call before I started the page. And initially I set it up with another Axios call for the detail when we swapped over to the detail page from the list. And that's when I started researching if there was a way. Apparently, I think what they're trying to do with the React Router is that as you go down in the hierarchy, it actually freezes the loader data from the higher ones and makes them still accessible. And they said it won't go away or reload until you actually go back up to the surface level of it. So they seem to really want you to do a page hierarchy.
Yeah.
So you can pull from all that, just like props and parent and child and anything else. So it's actually a very interesting concept. It seems like they're going to it a lot more.
So it sounds like you're saying you could.
It's just like use loader, and you just give it the ID of the parent, and you get the data from their loader because it loads the whole hierarchy when you go to a smaller page. So if you went directly to the URL for a detail, it had to load the whole hierarchy anyway, and it will give you that data. And then I just filtered it as I set the state there. So it had its individual.
Yeah. Cool. I'm looking at it right now, and it seems like you can give a certain level of the routing and ID, and then later you can reference that ID to get its loader data, not just your own components loader data.
Yeah, and I feel like there should be a way to use the parent's loader data and the child's loader, but I don't think there is right now. This whole loader thing is pretty new anyway. So right now I had to do it in the child component, and this is obviously a hook. You write in at the top of the child component, and then as I was setting a state, I let it do a filter find on that array. But this way you're not making multiple Axios calls. Once you have all the expenses, you can filter in between all the different details without waiting anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, that seems really useful, and it's good that you discovered it. I'm assuming just by looking at their API, because that's often going to be the case that maybe you do the tutorial and you learn about the essentials, and then you might start building, and then you'll realize I want to do this thing, but I don't know how. And more often than not, there's a way to do it, and it's built in. It's just you haven't thoroughly read their docs, or their docs aren't that good. So that's a really good find. Yeah, that was use route loader data. Yeah, very cool. Awesome. Yeah, well, certainly if people find it useful to use this loader pattern, that seems like that helps a lot to make it more robust and actually useful, and not do it the way that I did it yesterday, which was naive because it didn't know about this other approach. All right. Well, for the rest of today, we have like, 25 minutes. I thought it'd be worth looking at MUI. I've gotten a lot of use out of MUI. I used it at my last job, and it literally, I mean, it was the, like, we didn't write a lot of our own React components from scratch. We started with MUI as our base, and then anything we wrote was kind of built out of MUI and maybe a little higher level, like, so instead of having a button that is sort of built in like so, where I just say, button, and that's exactly a standard HTML type button. I suppose I want to run this again if I want to see it. But instead of, the standard HTML type button, you might want to make your own button class that like wraps it. But before trying to reinvent the wheel, using something like MUI means that we can use a button that they define and get certain functionality out of it. So first, let's actually get started with MUI. So we're going to see what installation looks like. I suppose they talk about it a little first about what some of the use cases are. Let's go to installation, and this is what we will do. I'm just going to use npm and copy paste this. I'll get out of here for a second. I'll do something like this, but I'm going to do -- save because I want to keep these in my dependencies list. And this is just going to download these three things. It really is just three dependencies, but this @business is just a way of saying like this is sort of a family of libraries. And so we're getting MUI/material, we're getting emotion/react, emotion/styled. And these are all things that MUI is going to rely on to do like animations and just get its basic stuff. And if I look in package.json, indeed, we have all that stuff now. They're mentioning some font stuff. I don't know if we do need to worry about this, but I'm not going to worry about it for right now, but you can definitely get your own fonts. So there's a fair amount here, but I just kind of want to get started at this point. So let's just see a really basic example. Okay, so we have our app here. And maybe I'm saying something like import button. So I want to import their button, and you'll see that the way MUI does things is this. I'm going to say @MUI/material/button, and it's actually giving us a separate import for each component. And the reason it does that is because it's pretty big, and they want to make sure that you're not just saying, I believe if you said @MUI/material, you could, just grab a button off of it. But doing so means that it's going to read this whole file, which is a gigantic file. If we click through, we'll see this is MUI actually defined, and it pulls in a lot of things itself, but it's very, very long. It's every single component. So we don't want to do that. Instead, we're just going to say export, we're importing specifically the button from material UI button. And then how do we use it? Well, just going inside of this video store, I could say something like, I'll take this out for now. Take this out for now. So just above that outlet, maybe I'm going to say, okay, let me just, put a button in there. Note that this, button is capital, so it is distinguished from the other one. And I can just write hello. And we should at least see something. Indeed, we do see a button here. Oh, no, I actually have to npm run dev. Okay, refresh. We do see a button here. If I were to inspect, I just want to make sure. Look in components, homepage. No, it's not the homepage I wanted. I want something like route. Where's? I guess I could use this. I just want to see. I click homepage. Am I actually, is this working? Is this the right button? I believe it has to be, right? But it's kind of hard to click it right now. It's I don't know.
It's
See,
the
I don't.
blue hello up top.
Ah, it's this one. Got it. Yeah, I was thinking something seemed wrong. Right. And if I went into homepage, I have this button here, right? Because I was thinking it doesn't look quite right. So right, yeah, we have this button up here. It doesn't quite look like a button yet, but just for demonstration purposes, here's my button. And indeed, it seems to understand it's a MUI thing. It's calling it button 2 for some reason. But indeed, it is a MUI thing, and so it looks a little different. And I click it, and nothing in particular happens, but you are seeing this little bit of animation. So why is this useful? Well, right here I have the button, right? And I just created a normal button. But if I look into here, I'll see that there is like an API. So I can, go to my components here and say, okay, button. And it's going to teach me a little bit about how button works. So I have like an API in the form of props. So maybe I just have my regular button and that works. But maybe I make a button with a variant equal to text, and we'll see what that looks like. Seems like that is the default variant equals text. But maybe I'll try another one like contained variant equals contained. Okay, now this looks like a slightly different button, and see how the colors change, but this is all being taken care of for you. You don't really need to think about it. And it is pretty cool that when you click it, you're getting this like pretty cool, based on where you clicked it, you're getting a little like radar effect of like, knowing that it was clicked. And that would probably take a fair amount of effort to do on your own, but you're just kind of getting it for free. And why not? Because, why style the button from scratch? Why not have the button styled for you? And importantly, have it styled in such a way that it's compatible with everything else as part of this library, because this library is based on a design system, and design is kind of difficult to do on your own unless you really think it out. So in some way you could just explore it here. Like it's going to kind of show you the different, what different props do to it. So here we got primary and then disabled, right? And then if it's a link, it's gonna, I guess by default, look like this, where you don't see it until you hover over it, and then you see sort of a square. Yeah, what else is there to see here? You'll see that, right, buttons can take an href. Interesting. And then disable elevation. So you might have noticed there's a little drop shadow here as if it's coming out of the page a little, and there is none here. So basically it's just giving you all these ways that without using CSS, you're just getting slightly different, a slightly different look, slightly different behavior. It still supports on click. You might be able to give it a color, but notice you're giving it a color like success or error, because MUI itself defined for you what actual color values you want. And I'm sure they are, as you see here, it says like, see adding new colors, because you can modify it to the degree you want, but they're kind of just giving you good basic defaults, where they're saying like, hey, when you say success, that's going to look a certain way, and it's going to be green. And if you say error, it's going to look a slightly different way, where it's actually going to be white, but the text and the border will be red. And just, it's making a lot of decisions for you. The difference between small and medium, for example, like it's all standardized based on this design system. Get some icons in there. So like, you can actually like, it's aware of lots of ideas essentially. So like delete icon is something that I'm assuming I can grab, for example. Like I can say something like, just like I grabbed button, I can say import delete icon from, I see they're not showing where they're getting it from, but let's see if we can grab something like that from MUI, where I say, let's see, this is everything that's in there. What do I want to say? Material / icon / well, I'm positive there's a way to get that delete icon. It does bother me a little when they use examples and they don't show you the full example.
think on the install part, there was a subsection about installing the icons.
Yeah, I saw that.
I don't think it's in the basic install.
Yeah, that's fair. So it's not built in, but it's worth seeing because that's another pretty useful feature. So we're going to go to the installation and it mentions icons somewhere. Icons, there we go. Okay, so it's a separate library. So let's grab that. Thank you for that. We'll just do that again with --save. Just so that it's part of our package.json. And then we'll npm run dev again. And now I should have access to this MUI icons thing. So now if I go here and I say /MUI /icon/material/ and now it might have, what was it called? Delete, just delete maybe. Not delete icon, just delete. Okay. I suppose we will see what this is. We'll see it. So hopefully this does work like expected. And it seems like I can say, you know, end icon equals, or right. So let's try that. So I have my button variant hello, and I can say end icon equals something like this. And it looks like this thing is an actual component. So let's see what happens when we do this. Cool. Yeah. Now we have, you know, a button with an icon and it's all standardized. And it's not anything you couldn't do on your own, but if you did it on your own, you'd have to do a lot of direct work. And now it's just sort of being given to you and you can combine things in a nice way and they're all compatible with each other. So we're still just talking about icon, but you know, I might be able to affect the size. So maybe within that icon, like this delete icon, I could say something like size. Okay, so I'd have to do something like font size inherit. And as you can see, it can get a little strange that you're you might have to like wrap things in a certain way. I guess this is the case of like a button. If I say size here, is it going to know size? Okay. So it tells me this is going to be size for the button though. So I made the button smaller. Now the button is larger, but in both cases, I think if I didn't have the inherit thing, I wonder would it know to make the icon the right size? It looks like it does. Learning the ins and outs of this API could theoretically take, you know, a very long time because there are so many little details, but they're going to have these like built-in elements. Like it seems like, okay, well, you know, delete icon didn't work exactly how I expected maybe, but what if I want to have like, you know, a large button and then maybe here for the end icon, I can, you know, actually give it, you know, something larger where, you know, I don't love doing it in line like this, but I can where I'll say, okay, it's a variant contain size large. And then the end icon is actually going to be an icon button, I guess. I mean, I don't even know that this is really worth getting into, but you can see it at least. We're going to have to, of course, include icon button. Suppose we would get like import icon button, which comes from MUI /material /icon button, which is the right way to do it. So maybe I have my icon button here, and inside of there, I have my delete icon, and it seemed like it was saying I might want to say my delete icon has a font size equal to small, and the icon button could have a size of large. And let's just see what this ultimately looks like. So yeah, I can do some weird things and make it as specific as I want, where I say like, okay, well, the button is size medium, and the icon button, so the thing representing the full button, which you'll see is that circle around it, if you can see that. That's going to be like larger than normal. And then the actual icon is going to be smaller than normal. And maybe I'll make that large now, and I'll see that, you know, everything adapted to be correct. So you can just get like, you know, very specific. You see that circle is now smaller. It really wraps that icon. So you can just get very specific behavior by modifying, you know, not CSS, but rather just modifying props. And without getting into it, there are ways to customize the CSS and, you know, not just have to use their built-in CSS, but still gain all the benefits of just being able to define something with a prop. So, oops. What else is there to talk about here? Obviously, there's other stuff like, you know, you might have different types of checkboxes. It understands the concept of labels. Like this is too much to teach in any period of time. But the point is that you can use it like, you know, it has very good docs. So you just look through it and say, well, I'm looking for something like this. If you kind of learn over time what things are called and, you know, how something works. Sliders, those can be harder to do on your own, especially if well styled. You see, I got these little degradations there, or whatever you call it, where you can like, you know, hit a notch. So like, it's just got an API to let you do this stuff. So the fact that I can just like, you know, pop this in here, maybe right below the button. So I can just write something like this. I'll take out disabled. Of course, I have to actually import it. Okay, I'm going to save that. And how little work did I do? And now I have something like this. Pretty cool. And even more than that, it's not just that, you know, it looks a certain way, but I'm pretty sure that if I look through it, it's going to have something to say like, hey, you know, there's some kind of like on change here. Let's see what that might look like. Vertical sliders. So you see, they're just giving you like all these different things you might want to do. Now the question is, how do I actually read that data? I see there's an on change here. So I'm just going to throw an on change there where I say, okay, here's my slider. It has a default value. It has a step for each one of those marks. We're saying we actually want to see those marks. And have a minimum and a maximum. And maybe I'll say like, you know, on change. And what do I want to do on change? I want to, well, first I just want to see what it actually does. So it says on change here takes an event and a value. Okay, so it looks like I can say event, comma, value. And then at this other end here, I might just, you know, console those out, console.log event, console.log value. And I'll look at it here. It's a little bigger. Not sure where that's happening, but I think it's having an issue with the fact that I have a button, which itself contains a button. So I understand that it doesn't like that. I'll remove that for now. Cool. So I'm going to start changing this, and every time I change it, I get this mouse event, which it looks like I don't care about, but I also get that specific value. And that's cool because what that means is now, you know, I just got this slider basically for free, and I can read its value, so it can become interactive and work with other things. And it's just going to have this nice API, and kind of all there is to it. And, you know, it's going to give you lots of examples to say like, depending on what you want, we probably can support that. Yeah, I like MUI a lot. I got a lot out of it. Some of the best things you're going to see, so you have like these, you know, components, and they're splitting it up into different sections. So maybe there's input, maybe it's something like data display where you're going to say, okay, well, an avatar is sort of a standard concept. Here's the different ways we can work with avatars without even having to really think about it. And like, that's cool. You know, it's cool that you're getting all these features. What else is there? Tooltip, that's usually pretty nice. That can be hard to get otherwise. Dialogue, that'll be a good one. So instead of having to say like alert and it looks terrible, you can have these nice simple modals or dialogues that, you know, you'll be able to say something like that. And if we looked at the code for it, you know, we're gonna use some use state here and have, you know, these handlers to set it either open or false. And it seems pretty involved because we have, you know, dialogue title, dialogue content, etc. But what it is a way to sort of standardize this idea of making a dialogue, which is, I guess, what I would call a modal. And so you can just make, it becomes very easy to just create something like this, and the buttons are always going to be in the right place, and everything is going to be modifiable, but it's going to stick to a similar design system. So things will just look right and professional. Open draggable. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Drag and drop is not as simple as you would imagine. So you can get a lot of good stuff just by utilizing this library. Progress bars, those are really good. Like this is great. Like you would never be able to do this on your own. Someone did the work for you, so it's good to use it. And it probably, you know, any one of these things is like learning a new, not quite like learning a new library, but learning any one of these components is like, you got to learn its API, see how it works. But it will be easier than doing it on your own. So like before you load something, maybe something's not ready. This is a, you know, a skeleton is a good way to tell people, oh, something's loading and it will approximately look like this, not just say loading ... Cool. I mean, there's just so much that it gives you. Anything you could think of, you will eventually learn what all these means. So breadcrumbs seems simple. It's not as simple as you might imagine. Layout stuff. So you don't have to think about like doing CSS grid. You're going to have this grid component automatically, and it's going to be responsive to certain props. What else? Well, at a certain point, I mean, there's a lot of good stuff in there, but at a certain point, you can sort of like, part of the reason why they're doing this is that they eventually want you to say like, oh, we want to buy something from you. So this is something I actually used at my job where like we actually wanted a pretty involved data grid type of thing, and they provide their own and you have to pay for it. What that means is that you're getting like a really nice, you know, the ability to sort, filter, you know, I could say like hide that column. Like it's just, this would be so hard to write on your own, and they're giving it to you for free, but with see, it's got nice stuff, but it's with such an API that you're never going to have to write stuff from scratch. Like look at all the stuff that this data grid can do. Like as much as, you know, just about any other thing like this you would ever see on the internet. And while I'm not seeing it right here, I guess because it's a separate thing, it's going to have its own API, so we can, you know, interact with it by saying like data grid, give it some rows, give it some columns, and we just get something nice out of it. I'm surprised I don't see more of its where it actually defines how it works. Maybe that's because you have to pay for it first. That's probably it. But yeah, there's just a lot of good stuff out there like that. The lab, I guess, has things that have not been released yet. So just things that they're working on that they think might be useful, like if you have a timeline type of thing. But when building your app, you basically don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can think, what have I seen before? And over time, you kind of learn what these words mean, like what a popover is. I suppose that's a popover. What a popper is, that probably triggers the popover. Just all sorts of things you might care about. And as you see, some things are up to date, some things are like, they're implying that, you know, we use this less now or something, and they had broken links too, I guess. But yeah, that is it basically. So yeah, we just hit 12 p.m. CST. The assignment for today is essentially use these new tools, particularly I would say MUI, just to get comfortable with building out, the app, whether it's the video rental app or your own thing, where you just want to build it out further using your own desires for what you want to try and create, and just make it look as professional as possible and utilize, MUI as much as possible. And the task for today is really like, you want to get used to learning from an API, because at a certain point, no one teaches you. Instead, you have to learn from this document that is usually subpar. And so learning to use to read documentation well is a big part of getting started with anything like this. So yeah, that is it for today. I will stick around for questions, but you guys are free to go now.
Hey Ben, does this have custom sizes like Tailwind CSS, or does it kind of just work off of the small, medium, and large type of thing?
You definitely can customize things. So they have a whole section here for customizing, and we might say something like, you were mentioning size. I wonder what that counts as. Like if I click theming here, I know that there are ways of like anything that it uses that are defaults, like small, medium, large. There's going to be some way to get in there and either say, well, for me, small means 8 pixels, or, I'm actually defining something new called extra large, and it's this big. So there's ways to get in there.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And I guess it seems to involve in JavaScript using this concept of a theme, in which you're sort of like defining some CSS type stuff directly in the JavaScript, and then you pass it to something that's MUI aware. I'm sure there's like a create theme, right? And so there's definitely ways, and theme provider, exactly. Yeah. So I've not explored this too deeply. But there's a way, like it's a robust enough tool that there's seemingly a way to do whatever you want and customize it as much as you want, but there's also sensible defaults.
I'm also assuming that this is reactive, right? To like the screen size or the window size of whatever it is that your project is doing.
Yeah, you're saying like it's responsive.
Yeah, responsive. Sorry.
It's definitely responsive to some degree. But of course, like as you could see there, like as I made it smaller, it understood like, okay, actually, like it's able to adjust to that seemingly. And that's another benefit of these things, that they'll handle all that complex CSS for you. But I'm also positive that there's a way to hook into that and say like, well, let's say the responsiveness they're giving you doesn't work for you. You probably can update it to follow your own, whatever they call those, media selector queries.
Right.
Yeah. So all customizable, sensible defaults. Very nice.
Yeah, this is really cool. I went down the path of the whole Tailwind CSS just recently.
Yeah.
And this looks a lot easier.
I know a lot of people do like Tailwind, I think in part because it is pure CSS. So it's a little more like, you don't have to worry, like, even if you're not using React, or if you switch from React one day, like you can keep all that. But yeah, it's just there's a bunch of different solutions, and they're all good in the sense that all of them keep you from having to create a design system from yourself. And unless someone at your company truly creates a design system, you as the programmer probably don't want to try and manage design, totally on your own in CSS. You probably want to rely on some stuff that other people have made, because like the hardest part of design is making sure that everything works with everything.
Right.
Cool. So any other questions, or should I stop sharing?